In 2010, the Constellation program had come to an end. A single test flight and ballooning projected costs saw the program that was supposed to return us to the moon and send us to Mars ended before the flagship spacecraft could make it to space for the first time. But this was not the end of NASA's Deep Space Human Spaceflight program. For the NASA Authorization Act of 2010 allowed the agency to keep the Orion spacecraft and continue its development. But the rockets of the previous Constellation program, the crew launch vehicle Ares 1 and the cargo launch vehicle Ares 5, would not be continuing further. This was to be the end of those vehicles. In their place, a single vehicle was chosen, a single rocket for both crew and cargo, derived from a different Constellation-era proposal, but one which would still trace its origins back to the old Space Shuttle program. This vehicle was written into law as the Space Launch System. It was supposed to take the Orion spacecraft into deep space and open up cislunar space to human exploration for the first time since Apollo. Derived from shuttle components, this SLS rocket was supposed to fly a lunar mission by 2017 and at a total program cost of just $11.5 billion. As we now know, this did not happen. SLS would not see its first flight until 2022, and its costs would balloon to $23.8 billion, making it over budget by $12.3 billion, even more than NASA would project it to have cost in total at the start. But what if this wasn't true? What if we were wrong the whole time in our understanding of this rocket? What if one of the most fundamental things we thought to be true about SLS was simply wrong? An unfortunate misunderstanding that has become one of the most well-distributed inaccuracies about the whole Artemis program. One that regularly threatens to have this program ended to save costs. What if SLS was never over budget at all? To understand why this most often repeated myth about SLS is not true, we must first understand where the myth begins in the first place. In the wake of the Augustine Commission that established the unfeasibility of the current Constellation program, NASA was presented with a choice of how to proceed. It could choose to use evolved expendable launch vehicles such as rockets like the Delta IV Heavy. It could modify the Space Shuttle into a vehicle known as the Shuttle C, or it could return to a scaled-back version of the Constellation program with a crew launch vehicle and a cargo launch vehicle. NASA did not choose to go with any of these architectures and instead chose another architecture of a single shuttle-derived rocket to launch both crew and cargo, as had been proposed by the Jupiter Direct architecture for the past several years. And with the NASA Authorization Act of 2010, Congress authorized NASA to pursue such an architecture, demanding whatever vehicle they designed utilize existing shuttle hardware, have an eventual capacity of 130 metric tons to low Earth orbit, and be ready no later than December 31st, 2016. However, this NLT date would not last for long. In the following year, in 2011, NASA would officially select a design for this new vehicle, and on September 14th, they would unveil this design to the public. And with this new design, Bill Gerstenmaier, NASA's chief of space operations, said that the agency would plan a first uncrewed test flight of the vehicle towards the end of 2017, while future NASA administrator, then Senator Nelson, who was a major proponent of the SLS rocket, believed it would cost $11.5 billion to build the vehicle, and other NASA sources claimed that by 2017 the rocket would cost anywhere from $10 to $18 billion. However, these predictions would all become obsolete as time went on, as first 2017 came and went, and then 2018, 2019, 2020, and then 2021, with no launch in sight. SLS costs kept piling up until it eventually made its debut launch in 2022. By this time, the program had gone on for so long that SLS was no longer part of the Exploration Mission Architecture, which had its first and only flight, Exploration Flight Test 1, back in 2014. Instead, SLS was now part of the Artemis program with the aim of returning humans to the surface of the moon. And by the time SLS flew its first flight for the Artemis 1 mission back in 2022, the total cost of the entire rocket program up to that point had hit $23.8 billion, far beyond the original $10 to $11.5 billion estimates from NASA. If this is the case, how can we realistically say that SLS has never been over budget when it has clearly cost tens of billions of dollars more than NASA projected it would cost at the outset of the program? Well, the answer lies in how we understand these predictions that were made back in the early days of the SLS program and their relations to the actual costs of the vehicle as it made its way through development. First, we need to break down the original predictions. The original NASA prediction was that SLS would cost between $10 to $11.5 billion in total development cost by the time it took its first flight in 2017. However, we know this didn't end up happening as SLS first flew in 2022 at roughly $24 billion. However, what we need to understand is that this is not actually one single prediction, but rather two separate predictions. And once we break these predictions down, things begin to make a lot more sense. The first prediction is that SLS would fly for the first time in 2017, and the second prediction is by that time, 2017 specifically, the rocket would have cost around $11.5 billion. We know that the first prediction ended up being wrong, as the rocket didn't fly until 2022, which constituted a 5-year delay, and this fact is rather well known already. As for the second prediction, this is where things actually get rather interesting. Here is a list of the funding SLS got from Congress each year through the year 2017. And what's interesting about this series of numbers is that if we add them all up, we arrive at a grand total of $11.8 billion by 2017. This is a remarkable discovery because it means that NASA was actually pretty dead on with their cost assessment of the SLS program, that this vehicle would end up costing around $11.5 billion by 2017. However, this still means rather little, seeing that the rocket didn't actually fly in 2017 and instead flew in 2022 at a total price of $23.8 billion, right? Well, this is where we actually need to jump into the semantics of what the phrase over budget actually means and how Congress actually appropriated the funds to this specific program. As shown previously, Congress did not give NASA a lump sum of $11.5 billion in 2010 to build SLS and have it fly by 2016, only for it to then exceed this budget by billions of dollars. This is not how Congress works. What actually happened is that in the NASA Authorization Act of 2010, Congress appropriated money to SLS for 2011, 2012, and 2013, and subsequently gave the SLS program a set amount of money each year, every year, up to today. This is how SLS actually gets its money. It is funded by Congress on a yearly basis. In that framing, the NASA predictions in 2010 were just that, predictions, not budgets. This is perhaps the most important fact to conceptualize in this video. They were predicting, not setting a budget for the vehicle. In fact, if we actually look at the NASA Authorization Act of 2010, we can see Congress appropriated $1.6 billion for the SLS program, as well as related expenses for the fiscal year 2011. And in the year 2011, $1.5 billion were actually spent on the rocket. For fiscal year 2012, $2.65 billion was appropriated to SLS and other related expenses, while in actuality, roughly $1.5 billion was actually spent on the rocket itself. And lastly, for fiscal year 2013, another $2.6 billion was appropriated for the Space Launch System and associated programs and other necessary support, while in 2013, the rocket was actually funded at $1.4 billion. This means that SLS never exceeded its initial budget set by Congress in the NASA Authorization Act, and indeed, in subsequent years, SLS would never exceed its yearly budget either, since Congress works via appropriating funds, and if SLS runs out of money on a given year, it doesn't get more funding until the next year. This means two important things. One, SLS has never had a grand total budget that it was supposed to be developed within and then exceeded, and two, it has never exceeded its yearly congressional budget, meaning that the rocket has never actually been over budget at any point in its entire history. And as for the original NASA predictions, as we have already covered, these cost predictions were indeed correct from a time perspective, as by 2017 the rocket did indeed spend nearly exactly as much money as NASA was predicting the vehicle to have cost up to that point in time. In order to better visualize what's going on here, let's take a look at this graphic. Here we can see a diagram showing the costs per year of the SLS program up to the end of 2025 in the lead up to Artemis 2, the second flight of SLS. Looking at this, we can see the original projection for SLS, $11.8 billion in 2017, and here we can see $23.8 billion in 2022, which is what actually happened. Notice, if you will, the total cost of the program in 2025 doesn't actually change. The only thing that changes is when the rocket actually launches. This is, again, because the SLS program did not receive a specific amount of funding at the start, but rather is funded at a yearly level. And, as we can see and have mentioned before, NASA was correct about how much the program would cost by 2011, they were simply wrong about when the launch would actually occur. And even then, they had good reason to expect that SLS would be ready to fly by the 2017 date, as every part of the rocket, such as the engines, the boosters, the interstage, the ICPS, and the Orion stage adapter, were all ready for a flight in 2017, with only the core stage taking longer to ready for flight due to it being an entirely new stage. If you'd like to learn more about why the core stage ended up taking so long to be ready, I actually have a video about that out on my channel. Link to that video will be in the description, or you can click the title card that should be appearing now. To conclude, given all this information, it is clearly apparent that SLS has never actually been over budget and was always exactly in line with the cost predictions that NASA had originally envisioned, even if the actual launch of the rocket did not occur when NASA thought it would. And with that being said, due to the lack of any lump sum budget from 2010 and the fact that SLS did not ever exceed any yearly congressional budget, we can now safely say with certainty that the SLS rocket has never been over budget in any sense of the term. Yet, if this is indeed the case and SLS has never actually been over budget, why do so many news outlets, journalists, and influencers of all kinds continue to repeat this inaccuracy? Well, it is in part due to the conflation of early predictions with a non-existent budget. And of course, now we know that this is not the case, as, of course, predictions are not budgets. Yearly congressional appropriations are budgets. But this is not the only reason. Another reason this myth continues to be perpetuated is because people like to know if they're getting their money's worth out of whatever they're paying for. And as such, a quick and easy way to tell if a program is doing that is to see how over budget it is. This means that, even though SLS has never been over budget, the conflation of the predictions with a non-existent budget and the desire to know how much extra has been spent means that you see these articles talking about SLS being billions of dollars over budget. But since we can now no longer say that SLS has been over budget, how can we ascertain if it is actually worth the money we've spent on it? Well, to do that, you'll need to compare its development costs to those of other similarly sized rockets. And indeed, I have another video on my channel that covers exactly that. The link to this video will be in the description below, or you can click the title card appearing now. And, in short, the video shows that SLS has been developed for a fraction of the cost of its peer NASA rockets, due in part to the reuse of shuttle technology, and as such we ended up getting a vehicle with more capability for far less money, which is a rather good way of looking at these development costs. But in the end then, why does any of this matter? Sure, it isn't over budget, that much is clear at this point, but it still costs $23.8 billion to get to its first flight, so why does that even matter? Well, the answer is that SLS is a taxpayer-funded vehicle. When a news article is published saying NASA's SLS rocket is billions of dollars over budget, the implication is that this vehicle, which the taxpayers have given their hard-earned money towards, was supposed to only cost a certain amount of their money and has since demanded from them even more money. This is the implication of saying a taxpayer-funded program is over budget, after all. But as we have seen throughout this video, this was simply never the case at all. Whether SLS flew in 2017 or in 2022, the program was always going to cost the same amount of money once it's over and done with. It's not as if launching it in 2017 would have saved the taxpayer $12 billion. No, that money was always going to have been spent pretty much identically to how it was spent in our own time in order to keep the program operational. Thus, the reason it matters so much to correct this myth is because the taxpayers didn't have to pay more than they should have for SLS, and implying that they did is extremely detrimental to our nation's space program, as NASA only survives as an agency because the public sees it as a good use of their money. If we allow ourselves to continue misinforming the public as to how their money was spent with regards to this system, we risk permanently damaging the entire reputation of the greatest space agency our world has ever known. Well, here it is, outro time. I am not doing this scripted because I don't want to write anymore, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that very controversial video where I attempt to make the case that SLS has never been over budget, and I think it was a pretty effective case. We'll see how it goes though. You always know with these extra controversial takes, they get extra, extra reception, so to speak, so we'll see how that goes. One thing I didn't hit when I made this video was that yes, it is not over budget, but it still cost $23 billion. Why is that worth it? So I guess in the outro, I'll take the time to just off the top of my head give like a little bit of reasoning on why it is worth that much money. And the reason is because we really don't have anything else right now, right? Imagine a scenario where Ares 1 was still around right now, and it doesn't matter what it would have cost. If Ares 1 was still around right now, it would not be worth it, because there are at least 2 different rockets that can do what Ares 1 can do, and they can do it far cheaper than Ares 1 can do. But that's not the same for SLS. SLS is just so far beyond Ares 1, which is funny because it uses the same launch tower, and it's the same height, and it's very similar in certain aspects to Ares 1, but fundamentally it's a completely different vehicle, and it's doing something that nothing else can do right now. Starship can't get crew to the moon, let alone it can't really get crew anywhere right now. It's not a crewed vehicle. New Glenn isn't a crewed vehicle, and New Glenn 9x4 doesn't come online for several years. SLS is the only thing that's going to get astronauts to the moon anytime soon. So if you want a moon program, you gotta spend the money on the moon rocket, right? Maybe one day there will be alternatives to SLS, but by then SLS will have completed its primary mission of getting us back to the moon and building the Gateway space station. And in that frame of reference, I think, yeah, 100%, all the money we've spent on SLS has been worth it, undoubtedly. So has it been expensive? Yeah, you could maybe say it's been expensive, but you can't really say it hasn't been worth it, and you now definitely can't say it's been over budget. So I hope that this video was interesting, and I hope you enjoyed my little take there. I don't know what the outro looks like at this point because I'm going to probably create a new thing for that, so it'll be a fancy new thing that I didn't have in my last videos, but I look forward to making more SLS videos. I have more time now, so I'll probably do that. That's another thing. I made this video in like 3 days. Like, the intro to this video, I made the day I uploaded it to Twitter, and then the rest of this video I made over the course of 2 days. I wrote it, recorded it, and edited it over the course of like 2 days. So we'll see if I can keep that pace up for future videos, because there's other videos about SLS I'd like to make. Videos about why it can't be canceled, which is I've got a script for that somewhere. I need to work on it a little bit more. I'd like to make videos. I'd love to make more videos about Block 1B, because that thing is going to be really special when it comes online, and I need to make some videos about it. But there's tons of stuff about SLS I'd love to make content for, and I need to start making more content. But now we're about to hit 4 minutes at this outro thing, and I'm about to stop talking. So thank you all for watching. I hope if you enjoyed it, you subscribed. Even if you don't think I'm right, if you enjoyed that I tried to make this case, I'd enjoy you might enjoy future content from me then. So yeah, I'll see you guys around in the next video, and I guess all that's left to say is Godspeed to the crew of Artemis 2, who will be launching to the moon next month.